There is a forbidden Tyranid theory whispered in the quietest corners of the Ordo Xenos, a theory so unsettling, so paradigm-shifting, that most Inquisitors refuse to record it in physical archives. It is the possibility that the Tyranids are not merely an extragalactic swarm, not simply mega-predators, not even a biological super-civilization. Instead, they may be the fragmented, physical incarnation of a dead chaos god, a god extinguished so completely that it broke into matter, scattering itself across the material universe in the form of adaptive organisms driven by a single instinct: to reunify and be reborn. To explore this theory, we must first understand the nature of chaos gods, and more importantly, the nature of their deaths. A chaos god does not die in the way mortals do. They are embodiments of emotion, created by the psychic output of entire civilizations. For a god to die, its emotional source must be extinguished, and its psychic form must collapse in on itself. Such a collapse would not simply vanish. It would leave a wound in the warp, a hollow cavity where divinity once existed, and some ancient demonologists believe such a god did exist long before the modern pantheon. A god of hunger, a devourer of existence, not ideas, a being that fed not on emotion but on biological life itself. The first clue is the shadow in the warp. Unlike the psychic signatures of Korn or Tzeentch, the shadow is not an emotion amplified. It is the absence of emotion altogether. It is a silence that suffocates psychic thought, shutting down warp communication and suppressing sentient minds. It does not corrupt, tempt, inspire, or mutate. It simply erases. In this sense, the shadow behaves not like the influence of an active god, but the after-echo of a dead one, the feeling of a divine void pressing against reality. When a chaos god dies, its domain collapses, and psychic pressure around it creates a region of nullification. The shadow resembles exactly that, a wound in the warp, a place where something enormous used to be. The second clue lies in Tyranid biology. Their hunger is not merely survival or expansion. It is ritualistic. They do not simply conquer planets. They break them down to elemental components. They strip oceans, atmospheres, crusts. They do not terraform worlds. They unform them. A chaos god of hunger would feed on the totality of existence, not selectively. And the Tyranids practice this on a cosmic scale. They consume not for territory, not for reproduction in the traditional sense, but for accumulation. Accumulation of matter, energy, and, most importantly, psychic mass. Every life form consumed strengthens the hive mind's presence in the immaterium. Their consumption has a spiritual component. Each world devoured contributes to a growing psychic gravitational pull, as if each feeding ritual is adding pieces back to a shattered god. The third clue is the nature of the hive mind itself. It behaves like a warp entity bound to real space. It is not localized. It exists simultaneously across countless creatures. It is unified, singular, and telepathically absolute. The hive mind resembles a chaos god far more than it resembles any biological intelligence. But unlike the chaos gods who exist fully in the warp, the hive mind is partly anchored in matter. It is as if it is trying to push into the warp, but has not yet gathered enough psychic mass to exist there independently. This matches some radical inquisitorial theories, suggesting that the Hive fleets are not invaders from another galaxy, but pieces of a scattered divine consciousness attempting to reassemble enough strength to ascend into the warp once more. Consider the behavior of the Tyranids during major conflicts. They are not deterred by warp storms. They are not influenced by chaos corruption. Demons have difficulty manifesting in areas where Tyranid biomass is concentrated. In moments of immense Tyranid presence, the warp becomes unstable and thin, not from psychic overload, but from psychic starvation. The Tyranids create anti-chaos zones as if their very existence is hostile to the other gods. If they are indeed fragments of a dead chaos god, this makes perfect sense. They are not aligned with the ruinous powers because they predate them. They are not susceptible to corruption because they were themselves divine once. They do not respect the rules of the warp because they come from an era before those rules existed. The fourth clue lies in galactic history beyond human understanding. Eldar mythologies speak of the primordial pantheon, ancient warp entities older than Khorne, older than Slaanesh, older than the Eldari themselves. These primordial beings fed not on emotion, but on raw concepts of existence, destruction, entropy, hunger. Some were destroyed in ancient wars long before recorded cosmic history. One of these entities is described only as the devouring star, a being whose hunger was infinite, but whose consciousness was dim, instinctual, and blind. Eldar seers claim this being was torn apart by the rising emotional gods of the younger warp. If such a god were shattered, its essence could have been flung into the material universe in the form of matter, evolving over eons into biological engines of consumption. Over millions of years, these fragments could converge, adapt, evolve, and begin returning to their original purpose, to consume everything so they can reassemble the divine whole. Then there is the trajectory of the Tyranid fleets. Imperial scholars claim they are fleeing something terrible from another galaxy, but the pattern of their arrival does not resemble flight. It resembles convergence. Hive fleets are not approaching the Milky Way randomly. They are approaching from multiple vectors, as if drawn by a central gravitational point. The Milky Way may contain the last missing psychic essence of the dead god. Perhaps a part of its consciousness was left behind inside the warp of this galaxy. The Tyranids are not running from something. They are racing towards something, the final shard of their own divinity. The most disturbing implication is what happens if they succeed. If the Tyranids consume enough life, enough psychic potential, enough raw biological matter, the hive mind may reach critical mass. At that point, it could breach the veil and reform entirely as a warp entity. But this reborn god would not be like Khorne or Nurgle. It would be a being of pure hunger, anchored simultaneously in real space and the warp. A devouring presence that could drain existence on a cosmic scale. The Tyranids would no longer be needed. They would dissolve into psychic essence and become the body of the reborn god. The galaxy would not just be consumed, it would be transformed into a cocoon for the ascension of a dead divine predator. And if this theory is true, then the Tyranids are not monsters. They are a resurrection mechanism, a divine healing process spread across galaxies. And the Milky Way is simply the next offering, the next sacrifice to rebuild the god that once was. The true horror is not that the Tyranids might destroy the galaxy. The true horror is that destroying the galaxy may not be their end goal, merely the final meal needed for an ancient god to wake up again.